leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC with Nigel Farage. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC.
Good morning, everybody. Well, the horrors of Nice are unspeakable. I have to say, I quite deliberately have not watched any of the online footage. I just think it would be just too terribly upsetting. 10 children dead, and it's pretty clear this is the 7th attack in France over the course of the last 18 months. We've seen cells repeatedly arrested in Brussels. It's clear the threat from extreme Islamism is all too real. The question is what is to be done. Now, just earlier this week, in fact on Tuesday this week, the French intelligence chief, Patrick Calvet, said he feared that if there were more attacks, there could be a civil war in France. I'm not so sure whether that's right, but politically, think about this. We've got this week the convention for the Republican Party in Cleveland, Ohio, which I'm going out as an observer to, and Donald Trump's response to the attacks is to say that what now needs to happen is that Congress in Washington needs to declare war on Islamic terrorism, and he says that America is going to have to introduce incredibly tough immigration controls, including nobody going into that country from countries like Tunisia, for argument's sake, that are afflicted. And in France, well, there's a really big debate going on in France, and they have presidential elections next year. The first round's in April, the second's in May. The French Prime Minister, in the wake of this horrific attack, has said that terrorism will be a part of the country's daily life for a long time. Is that surrender? Is that reality? Or is what Le Pen is saying right, in that the government has completely failed, the security services have failed, and that France needs to get tough? Are Trump and Le Pen the solution? Or would, if they became the presidents of their countries, actually the whole thing become inflamed yet further? I don't think any of us have got a perfect solution to this. I suppose I have been in some degree of controversy on this subject, because what I said just over a year ago was that we already had in Western countries a problem, and that to add to it by opening up to virtually anybody that wanted to come from the Mediterranean last year could only make a bad situation worse. And you remember Angela Merkel last July saying anyone that wants to come will be accommodated by Germany and the rest of Europe. So I still stick to the view that whatever problem we have, we've probably made it worse, and I think that the EU has got to fundamentally change this open door policy across the Mediterranean. It has tried to. It was trying to do a deal with Turkey, but perhaps that doesn't look too solid after the attempted coup there. So I'm particularly keen to hear from people, if you're American listening to this, if you're French listening to this. And I think, is it right that London, the number of French people here now make it the 6th biggest French city in the world? So whoever you are, and don't believe the press, I love speaking to Europeans, so whoever you are, if you've got a view on this, do Le Pen and Trump offer solutions, or would they make it even worse? And would you vote, or perhaps you do have the vote, would you vote for Le Pen, would you vote for Trump? So let's see where we go with this, and I have to say I'm worried about France, and I've been worried working in Brussels now for some time, that just large parts of that city are now virtually lawless. Very difficult in the centre of Brussels for women at night to walk alone, particularly if they're blonde-haired. They get repeatedly stopped and pestered. Something has gone very badly wrong. What do we do? And the first person I'm going to ask for an opinion is Michael in Romford. Good morning, Michael.
Hi, Nigel. It's an honour to speak to you. I'm 14 years old, and I think that we should use all our forces against these Islamic terror groups because we need to destroy them before they destroy us.
Well, Michael, I get that. I mean, all this talk about war and the threat to our civilization, just get some sense of balance on this. It's horrific that 84 people were killed in one incident, 10 of them, as I said earlier, children. But, I mean, just sort of bear in mind that at the moment, in this country, France, Belgium, you're more likely to be killed in a car crash than you are to be killed by terrorists. And that, by the way, that is not, Michael, from me complacency at all. But here's the problem. How do we fight those forces? We can fight them in this country, and the argument is that our security services are very, very good, and, you know, we tend to stop these plots before anything actually happens. And indeed, in Germany recently, there was a Dusseldorf gang, 4 people that were planning some atrocity, and the German services picked them up. But the problem, Michael, and I'll put this back to you for your 14 years' worth of wisdom, do we go and attack the problem at source? Because, you see, what I'm looking at from Donald Trump is he says we need to defeat this enemy of civilization at its source. Now, presumably, he means in Syria, he means in Tunisia, he means in Libya, he means in all those countries that effectively are the cradle of fundamental Islamic extremism. So you're too young, Michael, yet to be called up and for us to put khaki on you. But, I mean, do you think, Michael, we should go into North Africa and the Middle East and take on ISIS?
I think we should. I think we need to get to them before they get to us.
OK, well, strong words. All I would say is that we went to war in Iraq to get rid of a bad man. We went to war in Libya to get rid of a bad man. And all we've done, I think, is to make the whole thing really slightly worse. But I get the point, and I sense, Michael, you're saying it, Trump's saying it. I sense a lot more people are going to be saying, you know, let's go in and fight. But it's not always easy to take on an enemy that you can't see. You know, if the enemy are wearing uniforms and carrying standard rifles, you know who they are. If they're integrated inside communities in towns and cities, not so straightforward. Dominic in Dorset. Good morning, Dominic. What do you think?
Well, I agree with what Michael said, to be fair. You know, Trump should get in there. I mean, they're after us, so we should get them. But Trump seems to be the person that actually is saying something about it.
Is there any sort of approach of Donald Trump's that gives you slight reservation? Do you think he goes sort of over the top sometimes, or...?
Not necessarily. I haven't really been following Trump's scene much, but Trump himself, what he's actually doing in America is he's actually getting these issues into mainstream politics, which is what we need.
Well, he's certainly not frightened about talking about things, is he? I mean, but when he says things like all Muslim immigration should cease, I mean, is that likely, Dominic, to make the Muslim community in America, and albeit it's not very big, but it's about 3 million people, is Trump saying that more likely to make those 3 million integrate with American society, or is it more likely to make them feel actually marginalised and more likely themselves to move towards extremism?
Yeah, that could possibly do so. I mean,
yeah.
You know, if then the imams who are actually preaching, you know, radical views then turn around and say, yeah, this is what the Americans think of us because of the amount of support that Trump's getting, then, yeah, I can understand where you're coming from there. Yeah.
No, it's not easy, but one thing for certain, Trump does tell it as he sees it. And as I said, I'm going to be out there this week. I'm flying out on Tuesday. I'm there for 4 days, and I should be in the hall and listening to his speech and that of his vice president, the governor of Indiana, who, by the looks of the TV footage yesterday, Mr. Trump himself barely knew, which has struck me as being really rather odd. But I'm not going there to back Trump. I'm going there really as an observer. And even if I did want to back Trump, having seen Obama come to this country and tell us what to do in the referendum, and for that to blow up in his face and actually to boost the Brexit cause, the last thing I'm going to do is back anybody. But I do think, I actually myself now think, that Hillary Clinton is so mired in an endless series of scandals, whether it's donations to the Clinton Foundation, whether it's emails that were being done in private and not necessarily open to the services in America, whether it's that sense of entitlement that she seems to have, as if it's her divine right to become the US president. I have to say one thing, I wouldn't vote for Hillary even if you paid me a very great deal of money. Dominic, thank you. And we go to Peter, who's calling from Krakow. Peter, hello.
Hello, Nigel. Just wanted to say what a courageous man you are for enduring so many threats to you and your family over the Brexit campaign. And I think people should know about that because it wasn't reported much in the mainstream media.
Well, Peter, it was one of those campaigns in which emotions bubble to the surface and beyond. And actually, we've seen a little bit of that even since the referendum. And I will, after 11 o'clock, I'm going to talk about that. And maybe is this the week when those that back Remain have finally accepted that we are going to leave? We've had a democratic vote. So, yeah, you're quite right. Some nasty things were said and done, to be fair, by both sides. But anyway, Peter, go on. What do you think about Donald Trump?
No, my main point was I wanted to highlight the differences between the UK and the US, because the US has a relatively small population of Muslims at about 1%.
Yes.
And the UK has a population of about 5%. So it's much larger in percentage terms. Now, the US really stands where the UK stood in the 1990s. Now, they can either go down the road of the UK and start enormous amounts of immigration by voting for Hillary Clinton, or they can vote for Donald Trump and stop that, and basically remain as the UK was in the 1990s. And in my opinion, if they do that, they will reduce the terrorist threat, the Islamist terrorist threat.
So, Peter, if you were American, you would vote Trump, would you?
Well, just for that, because and if I could go back in time into the UK to the 1990s, and I could stop immigration from those parts of the world that have brought these troubles to us, that's what I do. And the other point I'd like to
Peter, I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you very much indeed for that. So Donald Trump has come out in response to that horrific attack, saying we're now in a world war and we need to stamp out terrorism at its source. Marine Le Pen wants a much stronger, tougher war on terrorism inside France. Get involved with this conversation. Call us on 0345 60 60 973. Text us on 84850. Tweet us at LBC. And you're listening to me, Nigel Farage. The time is 10:15. Leading Britain's conversation. Call us, get involved. 0345 60 60 973. And a variety of texts and tweets coming in. And one of the tweets that's come in has said, why don't we get more specific about this? It is Wahhabism that we're talking about. Now, just for those that know nothing about this, Wahhabism is a particular strain of Islam that has been pushed and funded by Saudi Arabia. And this is what has led to so much of the extreme thinking. It's what's led, in Riyadh, to a situation where women are now banned from driving motor cars in the capital city. And yet, British government after British government say that Saudi Arabia are our great friends and trading partners. And I have to say, I take pretty serious issue with that, because it's important here. And there'll be a lot of people listening to this programme right now who have Islamic faith but feel integrated in our society, and they'll be as horrified as everybody else by what has happened in Nice. We go to Fred in Teddington. Fred, what have you got to say about Nice and Trump and all these things?
Well, the first thing is we should not be listening to Trump or Le Pen. But the problem is this, Nigel.
Yeah.
Europe ought to be leading missions to the Middle East to help them to understand how to rebuild their communities, their societies, so that people would want to go back and they wouldn't breed the people who want to kill themselves. But the problem is that Europe itself lacks an economic development model that keeps our own people happy. After all, the discontent throughout Europe is due to our own governments imposing austerity. Now, so we've got to, this is where political parties like UKIP need to do fresh thinking about what it is that would actually rebuild communities, create jobs, build homes, both in the Middle East and in Europe. And it's not being done. And so I know that this is like a forlorn gospel in saying that nobody actually knows the answer on how to recreate peace. But here's a problem. Islam itself, Sharia law, has economics that creates poverty, but nobody is discussing that.
No, I agree with that. But isn't that the problem, Fred? I mean, I would suggest to you that the reason that there are some members of the Muslim community in this country who have been tempted by extreme ideology has really got nothing to do with the government, and we can talk about austerity, but we're still, of course, borrowing every year, and building a national debt by an extra 70 or 80 billion pounds a year. But there is a problem here, and it is social mobility. Theresa May talked about social mobility on the steps of Downing Street the other day, and what she really meant was social mobility between the classes in this country. People who haven't got rich parents, who can't afford expensive schools getting on. What she didn't talk about was the one group that is suffering the lowest social mobility in this country and the highest rates of welfare dependency are, in fact, the Muslim population of Great Britain. And isn't the real problem, Fred, a lack of integration? Isn't that really at the heart of this?
Well, we need integration, but that can only happen on the back of an economic model that rewards everybody for achieving what they can actually all contribute to society. And the problem with the Islamic Sharia economics is that it actually fosters unemployment and locks people in poverty. But so does our model. So there's not enough creative thinking being done by either side on how to overcome the barriers to prosperity, which then leads to peace in communities, of course.
Fred, no, thank you. And of course, it's worth pointing out that under some aspects of Sharia law, for women, it's actually very difficult for them to get into the workplace. In fact, in many cases, they're actually kind of put off from and told they shouldn't go into the workplace. Fred, I take your point. There is no easy answer to the social problems in this country. We go to Dave in Bromley next. Dave, good morning.
Morning.
Hi.
Saudi Arabia's our great friend, and they can do whatever they want, and we can turn a blind eye because they got oil. Sorry, did I say that out loud?
Dave, you did, and in fact, all you did was take what I'd said and just amplify it a tad. And don't forget, also, we sell them aeroplanes and things like that, don't we? So, I mean, when I first said this about just after the Paris attacks. And I said, why are we treating Saudi Arabia as our great mates? And I was told that I was threatening British jobs. Well, do you know what? I'd rather our trade with Saudi Arabia diminished a little bit and we as a society were a bit safer, wouldn't you?
Yeah, in an ideal world. But unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world.
That is true.
About the terrorist issue. Two options. Number one. Can we put Prince Charles on a horse and kickstart the Crusades?
Well, this is novel. Keep going, Dave. I'm enjoying this.
Okay, well, if we can't put Prince Charles on a horse to kickstart the Crusades, the only other logical and practical thing that we can do is to create and sign a declaration of war, because it's like the IRA back in the 70s, whereby the intelligence forces and the security services, they know who everyone is. If you went into the army and you got sent on a tour of Northern Ireland, you were given a book.
Yeah.
You were given a book with everybody. This is who everybody is, etc., etc. But when you're fighting by rules and regulations, it's kind of like the police, they can't do anything until after someone else has first done something.
I get the point, Dave.
Which is a bit late. So if we have a declaration of war and we sign it, we know who these people are. We know who the sympathisers are. We can round them up, put them in a prisoner of war camp, and keep them there until the war is over. If the war doesn't end, they never get released.
Well, Dave,
they're protected by the...
Dave, there is a slight problem here, Dave. There is a slight problem here. I get your point that with the IRA, we knew who they were. I also think we should say some positive things about the security services in this country, in that we have not mercifully to date suffered the repeated problem that has happened in France and Belgium. But here's the problem, and it may not be directly a United Kingdom problem, but it's definitely a French problem and a German problem. 1.8 million people came into the European Union last year through the Greek islands, through Italy, and do you know something? Not a single one of them was security checked in any way at all. So I now think
it's kind of like
it's a problem.
Like saying it's like with TfL with the minicab licences. If you were born in this country, you have to do a Criminal Records Bureau check, a
Yeah.
CRB check, to get a license. But if you come in from Somalia or you know, any country that's outside and you don't have any jurisdiction over, it's like, you know, you just got to take their word for it, which is, you know,
I'm sure
standards. And
I'm sure there are a lot of black cab drivers nodding at everything you've just said there, Dave. Listen, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Amy in Brighton. Amy, hello.
Hi, Nigel.
Good morning.
I just want to say how I'm just so proud of you, and I'm just so impressed with how you've kept your dignity and kept your
Thank you.
sense of self throughout everything that's been thrown at you. I can't tell you how impressed I am. But I would say that I am going to be voting for Donald Trump.
You are American, Amy, yeah?
Yes, I am. I don't sound exactly American, but it's because I've been educated here as well as there. So. But I absolutely am going to be voting for Donald Trump. No question. Because of what you said about Hillary.
Yep.
Exactly what I think, and I don't really know quite how she's managing to still be running.
No, well, let's be slightly careful, Amy. Otherwise, we might get lawyers all over us fairly quickly. But I think we both know what we're talking about. But I mean, not wanting to vote for that candidate. But do you feel Trump is the right candidate? That's the question, really. Because
he funded himself. He's an individual. He's not been backed by anybody to this point. He has been his own person, and he has stuck to what he believes in. He's talked about things like this for decades. He's not changed his opinion, and that is one thing about him that I admire. And he also will admit when he's wrong. I mean, he wants what's best for America, which seems to be nowadays something that's frowned upon when people want to look after their own countries.
He says, "Make America great again." Do you think he will?
Well, yeah, because the same thing happens there as here. Everything you pick up says made in China. The manufacturing is gone. The basic functioning of the country has been sold off. And he genuinely, everything that he says is 100% correct. And he does want to make it great.
Well, he couldn't have had a more ringing endorsement than the one, Amy, from Brighton that you have just given him. I don't know whether Trump's got all the answers or not. He's certainly not afraid to push the boundaries of debate. And I have to say I'm going to sort of sit there in the hall and listen to his speech on Thursday, not knowing exactly what's going to happen. But anyway, back to more of your calls in a moment, and we'll continue to discuss this horrific attack in Nice and whether Trump and Le Pen, who want drastic action, are they saying, let's go into a world war against these guys? Is that going to make life better? Is it going to make life worse? More of your calls in a second. Right now, let's get the news headlines with Glenn Moore. Leading Britain's conversation. After the top of the hour, we'll be talking about our new Prime Minister, the one that I said shouldn't get the job a week ago. Has she made a good start? Has she made the right appointments? Will the three Brexiteers do the business in Brussels? All of that after the news at 11. Meanwhile, we're discussing the horrors of Nice, the political reaction to it, Donald Trump saying we've got a call for an all-out war, Marine Le Pen saying much the same thing. What does Sheila in Harlow think?
Oh, hello, Nigel.
Hello.
Nigel, definitely not going in at source. We do not want another war. I mean, look what Blair and Bush, and then afterwards came Cameron with Obama trying to get into Syria, but luckily Cameron was stopped. But what I'm saying is there will be thousands and thousands of innocent civilians killed, and we will pay the price. The retaliation will be shocking, and Trump has to understand that. I mean, most of what Trump says is marvellous, but not this point. He must be stopped of that, because that wouldn't get anyone anywhere. And another question, Nigel, is it true that there is some talk of you going into I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, on a lighter note?
Right, let's deal with the serious stuff first, shall we? Now, come on. Maybe you're being a bit unfair. I mean, Tony Blair told us that we were going into Afghanistan and Iraq to make the streets of Britain safer. I mean, are you suggesting that he got that wrong? I think I know the answer to that. Sheila, I have to say, I am completely and utterly with you. I was against the war in Iraq. I was absolutely incensed by the stupidity of destabilising Libya. And I'm very, very pleased that it was one of those things where, UKIP was lobbying like crazy, and about 80 backbench Conservative MPs defied their own party. Otherwise, we would have been heavily involved in the war in Syria. And I honestly think, like you, that if we decided to use our army, what's left of our army, and that is one of the legacies of Mr. Cameron, is we're now in a position where we couldn't even defend ourselves. But if we were to use what's left of our army with other Western powers and send, hundreds of thousands of men, where would we send them? Where do you start? Do you start in Libya? Do you start in Tunisia? I mean, Sheila, frankly, I think it would be, I'm with you, I think it would be absolutely crazy to embark upon a 21st century crusade. It would not work, and it would lead to a huge, huge loss of life. Now, you asked me something else. Oh, yes, that's right. Now, look, I'm not going into the Big Brother house or the jungle or Strictly, or I'm not taking over from Chris Evans on Top Gear, and I think Len Goodman's retired this week as well on Strictly Come Dancing, and I'm not doing that either. I'll tell you what I am doing, Sheila. I genuinely am taking life a little bit easier. I'm a bit of a sports nut. I can't help it. And I've had little time for it over the last few years. And I was at Lord's on Friday, and for cricket fans, it is going to be a sensational day's cricket at Lord's. So I'm going to have a slight problem, Sheila, this afternoon, because we've got the Test match at Lord's on, but also the Open Championship golf at Troon. So I'm going to have to make sure I've got two tellies on in front of me. So I'm still working. I'm still an MEP. Once Article 50 gets declared, and we'll discuss that after the top of the hour, I should be there watching what's going on, hopefully cheering on the government. But if things don't go the way they should, I might just make the odd little comment in the European Parliament. So I haven't completely walked away. And Sheila, thank you, and thank you for your concern about what I'm doing next. Moving on to Richard in Pembrokeshire, Wales. Richard, hello.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. How are you today?
Morning. Good, thanks.
I was just going back to a point you made a little bit earlier about integration and how important it is. And one of my big concerns is that people coming to the country are not actually learning English. I don't see how you can integrate if you don't speak the language of the country,
I couldn't agree with you more. Do you know, 4 years ago, I said at a press conference that I'd caught a train from central London, and it was a stopping train. Do you remember? Stopping train.
Yes,
and it wasn't until we'd sort of gone past New Cross and Hither Green and Lewisham that actually around me in the carriage was I conscious that people were actually speaking the same language as me. And it caused uproar. You think I'd said something as if I'd said something dreadful? No, I think you're right, and I think that the language is absolutely fundamental.
Just on that specific point, I was wondering why you've spent more than 20 years living in Belgium, and yet you don't speak a word of Flemish, German, or French.
How do you know that?
You make people. Well, because this story about the wheels coming off your car came out that you don't speak. Do you actually speak French?
I speak a bit. I'll have you know, Richard, I am very good with the French wine list. All right, I know my way around a menu.
You drink Chateau Margaux on expenses at £100 a bottle, so I'm told.
You may be told that, and but I'm afraid that's not absolutely accurate.
I've seen the bill from the restaurant you go to in Lyon, Mr. Farage.
In Lyon?
Yes, in Strasbourg. Sorry, I do apologise.
That's all right. I've never been to Lyon. Should I go to Lyon, Richard? Is it nice there? Look,
in Lyon, no, it's rather a rough town. You wouldn't like it, Mr. Farage.
Richard, look, I tell you what, mate.
Why have you spent 20 years in a country but not attempted to learn the languages?
I do speak a bit of French, Richard, I will have you know, OK? I'm not a brilliant linguist, I'll admit to it. And I have been an MEP for 17 years. You're quite right. And I did it for one very simple reason. I did it so that I could have a voice. I went there to have a voice here, and I got that voice. And whether people support me or don't support me, we did get a referendum, and I would remind you that UKIP won the European elections in 2014. And Without us, there would not have been a referendum. And I don't drink Chateau Margaux, but it sounds like it might be quite a fun idea. Moving on to Sammy in Hounslow. Sammy, good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hi, Nigel. It's very good to talk to you. I'm a very big fan of yours.
Thank you. Thank you. But what about Mr. Trump? What about Marine Le Pen? What do you think of them?
Well, just as I'm a fan of yours, I'm a big fan of Trump as well.
Right.
I really agree with him that we are at war already. A long time ago, really. It didn't start now or yesterday. My reaction to this terror attack now in Nice was just, another one. Yeah, because it doesn't stop. Since 2016 started, it's been one after the other, and it doesn't stop. Really, I really thought something was going to happen during the Euros.
Well, I think everybody did, and I think the whole of France, sort of breathed a collective sigh of relief, and then something as horrendous as this happened. So
yeah, and you know that there is already a threat to the Olympics in Brazil.
Well,
so yeah, we are expecting there too.
Yeah, listen, Sammy, whichever way we cut this, it's not good. Maybe Mr. Trump is going to be the next American president, and I don't know what will happen in France. I think the bookmakers were suggesting that Marine Le Pen would win the first round of the French presidential contest next April, but almost certainly lose in the second round in May. Whether events like Nice change that, I don't know. I'm not sure. But Sammy, thank you for your call. Valerie in Barking, what do you think?
Hello, Nigel.
Hi.
First of all, thank you very much for all you've done, and thank you for stirring up an interest in politics again. A lot of people now are interested who I think it was dying out.
Yeah, you're right. They're actually talking about politics now, aren't they?
They are indeed.
Yeah.
They are indeed. Yeah. And what I'd like to say is our government have been ignoring the threat from radical Muslims, hate preachers and Sharia law patrols forever. Now, this is, I feel, a disservice to not only every other nationality and religion in this country, but it's also to the peace-loving Muslims who do want to integrate and abide by our laws, etc.
So, I mean, have we just been? Are you saying, Valerie, that our governments have just been gutless? Is that really the heart of this?
Yes. Afraid of being called racist, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I was told there are now 83 Sharia courts up and down the United Kingdom. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that every one of them thinks they're above British law, but it's been clear over the years that one or two of them do. It's a real problem. And do you see this problem in Barking, Valerie?
Yes. I mean, Ajam Chowdhury was supposed to have been sentenced back in January. He's still walking around our streets. And I've written to my local MP asking why, and I haven't had a reply. So, the thing is, we shouldn't change our laws for anybody. You come here, you know what our laws are, you don't like them, you don't come. Yeah. But if you do come here, and why should we change our laws? We don't change it for the Chinese, the Japanese, or any other nationality that come. Why are we changing it for Muslims?
Valerie, I do understand what you're saying, and I agree with the broad point that unless we all live equally as UK citizens under one law, unless we have that, then we're in for terrible, terrible trouble. Well, back to more of your calls in a moment, and we'll keep talking about whether Trump and Le Pen do offer solutions or whether they'll make things worse, and maybe just a thought about Turkey and the attempted coup that took place there on Friday night. It is now it has now been beaten by the Erdogan government. We believe hundreds of people are dead, but there is certainly a huge religious element to that as well. You're listening to me, Nigel Farage, here on LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Get involved. Call us on 0345 6060 973. Text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Before we get back to the phone calls about whether Trump and Le Pen are the answer, whether they make the problem worse, just some thoughts, perhaps, about Turkey. So we heard the news Friday night that there was a military coup. The army were attempting to overthrow the government. And I guess your first instinct always is, well, isn't this rather like the colonels, taking over in Greece just over 40 years ago, or some South American dictator wearing 150 medals in some bizarre uniform? And you assume that if the military are getting involved, they kind of are the bad guys that want to suppress the people. But actually, what's interesting about Turkey is perhaps the history of the army. It was a colonel in 1915 that beat the British and the Allies at Gallipoli, and he went on to be known as Ataturk. He was the founder of modern Turkey, and he absolutely insisted that Turkey was a secular country and a peaceful country. And as time went on, they joined NATO and became great allies. The reason that the army attempted to take the country over is they see Erdogan, the leader, as somebody who actually is taking people's rights away, somebody who in fact is pandering increasingly to a more and more extreme form of Islam. So sometime, and I'm not suggesting for a minute I support military coups all over the world or the overthrow of democratic governments, but it's a very interesting twist on that Turkish story. And amazing, isn't it? Military coup in Turkey, the country that our Prime Minister until last Tuesday had spent 10 years saying should join us in a political union. Thank goodness we're no longer going to be a part of it. We go to Mark in Barkston Ash. Mark, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. How are you?
Hi, fine.
Good. When you're mentioning Turkey there, don't you find it ironic that you've got Merkel, you had Cameron, you've got everybody around the globe saying what a fantastic man Mr. Erdogan is. Yeah, when basically you've got a large proportion of Turkish society who hate his guts because they see him as little more than a dictator. I mean, it is. I know he technically was elected, in a democratic election, but there's a lot of people who are saying that's not the case. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that it was. I think it's about the end of last year, beginning of this. There's a photograph of him, and there was film of him at the time that was put on the news and things, coming down a flight of stairs with the Prime Minister to give a speech. On the flight of stairs, he was flanked by men dressed in historical Ottoman Turkish military uniforms.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, if you imagine what would have happened if, let's say, David Cameron had done that and he'd been flanked by men dressed as crusaders.
No, quite. Look, I'm with you.
That sort of tells us what Erdogan,
yeah.
What is he? I honestly believe we're going to see Erdogan doing something to have himself made president for life, or even sultan. I don't know.
Well, we'll see. I'm with you, and I worry now this coup has been put down. What kind of reprisals will take place, and how much more authoritarian his rule is going to get. Did you have a thought, Mark, on the war against ISIS?
Yeah, I did. I have to be very honest with you. I hear so much nonsense talked particularly by the sort of, the people I know you really don't like, which is the media and the mainstream politicos who keep banging on about Islam as a religion of peace. None of these people have ever read the Quran. None of these people have ever read the Hadith. Because if you have read a good translation, or even better, an interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith, then you understand the religion and the thinking. And people are now, I know on the extreme right, are saying, we are at war with Islam. Islam has been at war with us since it was founded.
And what would you do about it, Mark? You've given me your view, but what should we do? That's what I'm trying to ask today. Would a Trump, would a Le Pen, would they provide answers or just inflame tensions even more?
Well, I think they would inflame tensions even more, but I don't really see that there's any alternative, because if we don't inflame tensions and we don't do something about Islam and put it back in its place, then, Islam is going to overrun Europe.
How do you put a whole religion, to quote you, back in its place? How do you do...
that would mean, China's just banned Islam.
But you wouldn't suggest we should do that, would you?
Africa have banned Islam.
Right.
Because they realise that it is a threat. There are very strict controls on Islam in Japan because they see it as a threat to their society and their culture, and they don't want that to happen. Islam has proved that it cannot live side by side peacefully in non-Islamic countries, and they must be the dominant force. That's what they're achieving in Europe. We can see that day in and day out. And if you look around the world, I've actually lost count of how many attacks there now are per week by practicing Muslims.
Well, Mark, certainly something has gone wrong within the religion of Islam. Of that there is no doubt at all. But I pray that you're wrong when you say it is wholly incompatible with living in Western civilization. I remind people listening that the Muslim population of this country is now about 3 million, many of them under the age of 18. And unless we get a good resolution to what is going on, then we're headed for a very bad future. Mark, thank you. We go to Ramon in Chingford. Ramon, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
Hi, very well, thank you. Far away.
Can I just say thank you for what you've done over the years? I'm a British-born Muslim.
Yes.
Supported UKIP for the last couple of years and voted for you. And what you've done is a fantastic job.
Thank you.
It's probably a lone voice as a Muslim, but I'd like to just say, regarding Trump, I actually agree with what he's doing. And I would actually agree with him banning immigration for Muslims for the next 5 years of what he wants to do. Now, that may sound a bit absurd to you, but at the end of the day, Trump is he wants to do what people like Cameron and I think May will do either, is look after his own people. He wants to put his country first and his people first. So if that means banning Muslims, all Muslims, even though a small percentages of those Muslims are Islamic extremists, he's doing what he feels is right. And he's actually, because at the end of the day, the US have a lot more problems than Islamic extremism. They've got the racial tensions between black people and white police. They've got the gun laws, which will never go away. You're going to have the shootings in the schools, etc. So what Trump is doing is great. As I've grown up in this country, I've been born in the early 70s. My parents came from Bangladesh in the early 70s, and they came in and they integrated. There wasn't any mosque around the corner. We integrated. Nowadays, we are being given, well, the people who have come here, the Muslims who have come here, you don't have to integrate. You've got my mum's worked for the NHS for the last 30 years. She's an interpreter. She interprets different languages to English. Now, back in the 80s when she started, there was a team of 2. There's a team of God knows how many now, and they've got agency. So basically, you can come here. You don't have to integrate. You can do what you like, and people on the left side, they think they're supporting us. They think it's not all Muslims, it's not all Muslims. But at the end of the day, they're making life hell for us because the people like these Chowdhuries, they should be kicked out. They should be. I know we keep on talking about human rights, but what about our human rights? What about the 84 people who died? Their human rights? Enough is enough. Now it's come to a point where we need to do something. We need to go into the mosques. And even if it's my mosque, they need to weed out the extremists, the Wahhabis. That is
I touched on that earlier, Ramon, didn't I? Yeah. Well, listen.
It's disgusting. And how people are just keep on carrying on and they're saying, no, it's not all Muslims, but there's a problem. And great that we're now decided to leave the EU so we can actually control our borders. But people keep on going up to you, Nigel, you're racist, you're racist. Well, I'm a Muslim person. I'm born and brought up in this country. Call me racist because I have the same view as you, Nigel.
Yeah.
And what you've done is fantastic, and you should be knighted, my friend.
Well, that's very sweet of you. Thank you, Ramon. And you've raised some really interesting points in that call, and I thank you very much indeed. And we go to John in Deptford. John, we haven't got long, so make it short, please.
Okay, firstly, congratulations. I think you've done a great job.
Thank you.
Second, in previous to the last 2 callers, the last 2 callers, the first one asked if anyone's ever read the Quran and what it actually says. Well, yeah, I agree that some passages might sort of incite violence, like kill all infidels. But I think that overall, the general message is peace and harmony. I'm not a Muslim myself. I don't believe in any religion. But I think that people should have a right to practice their religion in peace. And I think that overall generalisation and sweeping of that Muslims are terrorists and things like that is a very big mistake. And we're actually attacking decent people and getting their backs up and causing hatred on both sides.
No, John, thank you. I understand what you say. It would be the gravest error of all to lump the whole religion into one particular corner. That would be a total disaster for us. Well, thank you for all the calls and comments over the course of the last hour. It is a subject I suspect that we're going to have to come back to. Now, after the news, we're going to talk about our new Prime Minister, former Home Secretary Theresa May. Did I get it all wrong last week? Did I give you the wrong steer? Is she now wonderful? Either way, it's been a very big week in British politics. I want to hear your views on the new Prime Minister and the 3 Brexiteers. Coming up after the news. Leading Britain's conversation. Well, last Sunday, I sat here and I said to you that I thought Theresa May was the wrong choice for Prime Minister. She had backed the Remain side in the referendum on this biggest constitutional question we'd faced in our lifetimes. She was on the wrong side. Some said, oh, it's okay. She was a soft Remainer. Well, that to me meant she hadn't got the courage. No, I was backing Andrea Leadsom. No question. She was the right person. Well, within a few hours, that had all completely folded up. Leadsom was out, and on Tuesday, Theresa May went to Buckingham Palace and became our new Prime Minister. And I have to say, there have been 1 or 2 surprising choices in the first few days. Out go the Notting Hill set. The people who, as Tory MP Nadine Dorries once said, were posh boys that didn't know the price of a pint of milk. They're all gone. They've all been chucked out. And in come some new people. And the 3 Brexiteers. Boris Johnson, Foreign Secretary, can you believe it? Liam Fox, in charge of a new international department that is going to open us up to trade deals around the world. And by the way, what good news it is to hear Australia and Canada just in the last 24 hours saying, let's get on with it, let's do some deals. And the Brexit minister, the minister in charge of getting us out of the whole thing, David Davis, someone that I've known and respected for a long time, and a fantastic photograph on page 10 of today's Mail on Sunday of David Davis looking into the camera saying, go on, son, if you think you're hard enough, come and get some. I'm going to go into Brussels and sort the whole thing out. So did I get the whole thing completely wrong? Well, I will say I think she got off to a good start, and I wonder whether you agree with that. And was this the week when we finally accepted that we are going to leave the European Union, that there isn't going to be any second referendum, that things have finally changed? And I have to say, I did enjoy in today's Sunday Times Adam Bolton saying, so Brexit will mean that the European Union flag disappears from our number plates, our driving licences and our passports. Hooray, is all I can say to that. But perhaps you disagree, perhaps you still think it was the wrong result and we should have a second referendum. And I wonder, our first caller, Harrison from Basingstoke, what do you think?
Hi there, Nigel. It's an absolute honour to speak to you. Can I just say, I'm a big fan of you and your work, and I have been for several years now, and you're my favourite politician because you stick to your word and you speak the honest truth. I follow very carefully your speeches in the European Parliament. I say, as a 13-year-old, thanks for getting us out of the EU so we can take back control of our borders, our laws, and invest into our public services.
I think you've got a future in this, Harrison, I've got to tell you.
Well, I'm with you, yeah, that Andrea Leadsom was the best out of all the candidates for the job, but I think her remarks about Theresa May were taken the wrong way by a lot of her supporters, and that went on to damage her reputation and therefore pulled out the race. But I do think we should recognise that David Cameron offered a referendum and obviously trusted the British people to make their minds up more than Ed Miliband and the Labour Party, who didn't.
Well, that's true, although I think perhaps, Harrison, some would say that he was rather forced into that position by the rise of UKIP. But either way, whatever the reasoning, he did offer that referendum. And the Labour Party, and this is worth thinking about, not only were they opposed to the referendum, but looking at these people who are taking on Mr Corbyn, they still are talking about a second referendum. They still appear to refuse to accept the result of the greatest ever democratic mandate in the history of this country. And I would say, Harrison, by the time you get to vote, so you won't be able to vote. You won't be able to vote in 2020, will you? But by the time you get to vote, it may well be that the Labour Party, as we've known it for over 100 years, pretty much ceases to exist, because I can't see it's got much of a future. I mean, what do you think?
I agree. Well, I think they're going to end up splitting up, and I think what my dad suggested was that probably the new Labour people, the Blairites, as we call them, will probably end up either forming a new party or maybe even joining the Lib Dems. I don't know.
Well,
could happen.
Well, I think you're right. I think we're going to see, in the 1980s, which I know to you is like sort of ancient history, but some of us were around in there. Some of us were alive, honestly, in those days. And in the 1980s, the Labour Party split. There was an SDP party which joined up with the old Liberal Party in an alliance. And my bet is pretty much the same kind of thing is going to happen again. Harrison, I could talk to you for the whole hour because you're clearly wiser, better read, better educated and thought through than almost anybody I've ever spoken to. And it's a pleasure to have you on the phone, and thank you. And we go to John in Glasgow. John, follow that.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
I think Theresa May got off to a very good start, and her first words when she went into Downing Street was that she recognised the importance of being a unionist party, keeping the country together as Great Britain, and also visiting Scotland, which I think is a very positive sign. However, I don't think that she has by any manner of means got the Remain side put to bed this week, because Nicola Sturgeon effectively still doesn't accept the results of the vote for the country as a whole. We have a situation here where almost 98% of the political class in Scotland, not a single MP, not a single MEP with the exception of the UKIP MEP, and about 2 MSPs only, said that they were for Leave. Everybody else, every party, said they were for Remain. So they should have got about 90 or 95% of the vote, but they only got 60 based on that. And 40%, over 1 million people, effectively voted for UKIP 3 weeks ago, because they were the only party up here who were for Leave.
Well, John, you raise a very interesting point, because I did say, would I have to eat humble pie in terms of what Mrs May had done since she became Prime Minister? I want to say this. I think her appointments have been inspired. I think the Fox-Davis-Boris team is absolutely the right thing to have done. It sends a clear message. Some cynics say, oh, well, she's done that so that if they mess it up, it'll be their fault and not her fault. But I don't buy that. I don't get that. But where I am worried and disappointed, and where I think you could, between now and the end of the year, begin to see some splits, I have to say, John, I was astonished that she said, after meeting Nicola Sturgeon, that we wouldn't trigger Article 50 until Nicola Sturgeon was happy with us doing so. And since then, the First Minister of Gibraltar has said, oh, well, our view needs to be considered too. And, we had this vote as a United Kingdom. And I do not want, and I'm sure there are 17.4 million people, including many Scots, don't want Nicola Sturgeon putting a brake and holding up us getting back our democracy. So I have to say, whatever praise I've got for her appointments, I'm worried about this, because it would appear, John, that people think that Sturgeon wants to have another referendum on separating from the United Kingdom. But I would have thought, you're there in Glasgow, I would have thought they'd lose that referendum by a bigger margin than last time round. What do you think of that?
Absolutely, because of the 60% of Scots who vote Remain, Nicola Sturgeon currently says 60% of Scots, the overwhelming majority, voted to Remain. The question, the point there is that was yesterday. That was 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
The great many Scots who voted to Remain are also Conservative supporters, Labour supporters, Liberal Democrat supporters, who do not support her view of the so-called independent Scotland within Europe.
Which, of course, is impossible, isn't it? You can't be independent and be in the European Union.
Well, I think many Scots can only hope that the whole Remain issue over the next 2 years with developments in Europe discredit that whole philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, thank you. And I think, as I said, the positive signs that we've had from nearly 20 countries around the world that want to do trade deals. And do you know what, John? When we get our fishing waters back, and when Peterhead and all of those places, have got thriving fishing industries, there'll be a lot of people who said, do you know what? Actually, we are better off outside this European Union. Thank you. We go next to Chris in Stonebridge. Chris, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nigel. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the phone with you. I want to say congratulations for what you've done for this country, and it's an honour, really, it really is. In the last few weeks, I've lost friends for my support of Nigel Farage, and I don't really care much about them anymore because I believe in your principles. And I think it's honestly,
well, thank you.
In London, you can't really say you like Nigel Farage. You get the tax straight away. So
I know. I'm getting used to it myself.
Yeah. Well, I was a Brexiteer, and I just want to see this go forward, and we can move forward because I'm still sceptical about Theresa May in certain aspects. I think what you just said about Scotland and Gibraltar is a bit of worry because we don't want to delay this process and have more uncertainty. We want to push through and start making this country great again. I think the appointment of David Davis is excellent. I hope he can put his gloves on and go fighting because he needs to do a big fight for us. Now, lots of deals and a lot of negotiations to go forward. Let's get away from this hysteria. Let's get away from this scaremongering because it's not doing any good. And I think the bulk of it comes from London, which is a shame because I'm just fed up. You know, I contemplate leaving London one of these days. I just can't take it anymore.
Well, I think
not.
2 points there, Chris. 2 points there. I think that the whinging and it's not fair. Bob Geldof wants to run the referendum again. I think I'm not a fan of Bob Geldof.
Neither am I.
You know, and I try to get those fishermen to come up the Thames to protest about their industry, and he sort of drowned them out, which was wrong. But I think that's finished this week. I don't think the demand for a second referendum exists, apart from in the minds of some people in the Labour Party who were determined to destroy their own political party. And I think you're right about the David Davis appointment. And could I just recommend, Chris, that you read this article in the Mail on Sunday today. It isn't just the photograph that I talked about earlier. You know, he is saying he is prepared to get tough. He's not going to muck about. He was the Europe Minister back in the days of John Major. And they called him a charming B.D. I think we can work out what that stands for. And I know David is absolutely thrilled to have got this job. And he means it. He means it. Chris, thank you very much indeed. So what do you make of Theresa May's first week as Prime Minister? Do you have faith in who she is, where she's going, or, like John in Glasgow, are you a bit worried that Nicola Sturgeon has got in there already and perhaps she's beginning to lose her nerve? More of your calls in a moment. Leading Britain's conversation. So nearly a week into the job, and there's a big poll in today's Sun on Sunday. And it says things like, Mrs May has the courage to say what's right and not what is popular. And 55% say yes and 17 don't. And you go through all of this, and actually, a week in, the public have got a fair degree of respect for this woman. The only one she does badly on is where it asks the question, would be good company down the local pub? And only 16% say yes and 45% say no. So generally, people think she's doing pretty well. I think she's done better than I thought she was going to, but I'm very worried if she allows the SNP to wag the rest of the dog, and we don't trigger Article 50 and we don't get on getting back our democracy, then she will have failed. So it's, she's doing well, but it's not perfect. Frankie in Birmingham, what do you think?
I think personally that we should have a second vote on this.
What?
I think we should have the second vote.
Right.
I'm voting from prison myself. There's 89,000 prisoners who do not get the right to vote. And I would vote to stay in. And yet, I know I'm in prison, but one day I will get out and I should have the right to vote.
So are you telling me, Frankie, that you think 89,000 people in prison should have had the right to vote in this referendum?
Yes. Yeah.
What?
If they are the UK citizens, they should have the right to vote.
All right, so a murderer that's in prison, a rapist that's in prison, should have the right to vote.
How can I put it? In the long term, they will be out. They will be a member of the public. So no matter who they are, they should get the right to vote. What? I mean, whether they are murderers, rapists, or shoplifters, or what, they are still criminals. They go through the justice system. They get done. They go to prison. They do the time and get out. So they should have the right to vote.
Well, Frankie, let me just say, call me old-fashioned, but it seems to me that if you lose your rights for a period of time for going to prison, whether it's a relatively minor offence or whether it's a very serious offence, it seems to me that you lose your democratic rights for that period of time as well. And I know that as members of the European Union, there have been repeated court judgments saying that we ought to give prisoners the vote, or we ought to give some prisoners the vote. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think if you're in prison, you don't get the vote. And then, frankly, when you're back out, in society, you've done your bit and you're going straight and you're integrating back into society, then you get back your democratic rights, okay? But I that's how I feel about it. And I tell you this, Frankie, I'm confident that a majority of the British population feel as I do.
Right. All I can say is, when was it? I think it was about 2 years ago. We did a survey called in the Inside Times,
Yeah.
And UKIP was the ones that we voted for.
Really? Whoa.
Yeah. Right. So that was because we weren't allowed to vote, and all the prisoners was whinging. I'm one of the prisoners who's done 25 years in prison with an 8-year tariff, who took the government to court to say, I've got the right to vote because it's part of my rehabilitation. One day I'm going to be out there.
Yeah. No, Frankie. Once you're out, you get. And so, how much longer do you have inside?
Well, I'm hoping in 18 months I'm going to get my parole. I've got the hostel lined up and everything. So.
Right. Okay. Well, look, post-prison, once you finish with it, I wish you well, including your full right to vote. And thank you very much for the call. Yuri in Brighton, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Far away.
Okay, cool. Well, to start off with, I think we need a second referendum, and the reason for this is there's been this saying that British are lions led by donkeys. And unfortunately, from what I see, is that we go into this situation now that there's been lots of lies told from both sides, to be honest, and then once the facts started to unravel, everybody just ran off. And the problem is, for me, is that whoever talked about the referendum, they never addressed the elephant in the room. And, for example, the biggest problem is migration in Europe and around the world. And the elephant in the room is always the fact that in France, in Germany, in England, the minimum wage is next to 10 euros. If we look at Poland, if we look at Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the average wage, we're speaking about the average wage, not the minimum wage, is less than 500 euros a month. And why would Britain not take charge of the situation? Why is it that Britain chooses to run away from these problems? Because I know many people who came to UK from those countries, and they all say, look, we have the same prices as in England when it comes to bread, when it comes to a slice of meat, a sack of potatoes, but our wages in there are so low that we're just surviving. So why is it nobody addresses this elephant? And it's the same
Yuri,
around the world.
Yuri, firstly, the British are lions led by donkeys. Well, that was a German senior staff officer said that about the British generals in World War I. I would remind you that we might be slow to learn, but by 1918, those British generals, far from being donkeys, led, I think, the most successful military operation in the entire history of this nation and forced an armistice with Germany. So, and maybe it's the same this time round, because maybe our donkeys have woken up to the fact that 17.5 million of us have voted to get our country back. Now, Yuri, I get your point about different wage rates and everything else. Let me be clear what we voted for in this referendum. We have voted to get back our democracy. We voted to get back our freedom. We voted to get back the ability to make our own laws, have our own courts be supreme, and to control our borders. And we do not wish anybody, Yuri, around the rest of Europe, any harm, any ill will whatsoever. But we're going to get a grip on our own lives, and that is what we voted for. And Yuri, thank you very much indeed for your call. Next we go to Brian in Harrow. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. No, it's a delight to speak to you, actually. I've been trying to speak to you for years. I've supported your party since the exception, when you started out, basically.
Yep.
I'd just like to say I'd like to thank you for your hard work. And you freed this country from the metropolitan elite and political correctnesses which has plagued this country for the last 30 to 40 years. Now, that's just a quick synopsis of what... I could talk about you forever, but I won't go on about it.
Go on, Brian. Go on. What's your point? Thank you, but what's your point, please?
2 points. I've got 3 points if you could answer them. Right. Why did she go up there and lick the feet of Nicola Sturgeon straight away? That sickened me. That's made me feel absolutely sick.
Right, go on.
OK, why are they allowing postal votes to go on? Because that's the most crooked vote in this country.
Yep.
And thirdly, why are most MPs want to stay in the EU, don't they?
Yep.
So do you think they'll make a coup and say, no matter what we come back from Europe, we want another referendum? So I've got 3 points if you could answer.
Yeah, well, postal votes. I'm all in favour of postal votes if you're in the army, you're working overseas, or you're 96 and in a wheelchair and it's really, really difficult to get down to the local primary school. I'm all in favour of that, and that's what we used to have. And I'm afraid under Mr Blair's time and going all the way on, we now have constituencies where if there's a by-election, 60% of the turnout is a postal vote. Which will happen even before many of the candidates have got their literature out through the door. The whole thing has become utterly corrupted. We should scrap the postal voting register completely and start again for those who genuinely deserve it. As for our political class, look, Mrs May was for Remain, but she now says Brexit means Brexit. I think a lot of people in the House of Commons have woken up to the fact that this referendum has delivered a result they hadn't expected, and it's taken them a bit of time to get used to. So, I think if Parliament tried to overrule the will of the British people, I think the political backlash would be enormous, and it's why I find the self-destructive journey that the Labour Party is currently taking itself down, with candidates suggesting a second referendum, quite extraordinary. Your first point, well, I talked about the visit to Scotland and Sturgeon, and you said lick the feet of Nicola Sturgeon. I didn't quite put it like that, Brian, but I know what you mean. Look, clearly she is Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. She does need to take people with her, and that means meeting Sturgeon was right, but if she gives in to Nicola Sturgeon and we don't trigger Article 50 because of what Sturgeon thinks, that'd be a terrible mistake. Brian, thank you very much for your support over these long years, your kind words and your call. And next we go to Nigel in Leeds. Nigel, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Well, I must admit it's a big point in my life being able to speak to you this morning, because I've been an apostle of yours for years. In the nature of the work that I do, I've gone around the country and I've actually sung your name to the hilt with Conservatives, Labour, or whatever else.
Well, thank you.
I probably did my little bit in freeing us. I mean, you can feel the freedom blowing through the country.
Quite right.
Now, I think, going back to Theresa May's point,
yep.
Apart from you being PM, it's the best of one of many things. I mean, I think Andrea would have been a fantastic PM, mm-hmm. But as we are at the moment with Theresa May, I actually think the lady's been turning, because I actually think she's gone and swayed a little bit different from what she was before.
No.
The impression of the lady you got before, I think she's pinched some of Andrea's side, some of your side, and if anything, she's actually heading towards a UKIP side more so.
When I heard her talking about social mobility, I thought, crikey, she's joined UKIP. Nigel,
yeah, exactly.
So far, so good in terms of that. I agree with you. Long as she doesn't back down to Nicola Sturgeon. And thank you for being a UKIP apostle. Wow, how about that? Back to more of your calls in a moment. It's been a really extraordinary week in British politics. What do you make of Theresa's first week? Are you hopeful, sceptical? Is Brexit going to happen? Do any of you want a second referendum? Well, a chap from prison did a moment ago. 0345 6060 973. That's the number. And first, let's get the news headlines with Glenn Moore. Theresa May's first week in office. Some of you think she's wonderful. Others are worried that she's bowing a little bit too much to Nicola Sturgeon. What does John in St Albans think? John, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
My feeling about her is at the moment she's just being a typical politician and telling everybody what they want to hear. At the moment it's political leaders and things and other party members. She's had a canny thing to put people from Brexit in place, although they've not been the heavy ones, have they? They've not been heavy hitters. Boris is a bit light on Brexit, and David Davis, although he's a long-standing anti-European, he's actually pretty soft. I mean, he likes the single market still. I think she's at some point going to have to govern, and we cannot have this government by committee. Even the oppositions and MPs, you don't do this before you talk it through with us. A point comes and a government has to govern, has to get on with it. And I didn't vote for Brexit, but at the same time, it's democratically what was elected, what was voted for, and that's the end of it. As far as I'm concerned, no second chances, no second anything. We have a democracy, and it would be the most hypocritical thing for us to do if we veered against that. But for Theresa May, I think she's always been a bit lightweight. I thought how she kind of crawled out of the whole border control fiasco, and something she's had 6 years to sort of sort out, just tracking people coming in and out. I don't really mind people coming in and out. I think we can add the infrastructure. We're only occupying about 7% of our land with tarmac. I think at the end of the day, we've just got to get on and govern and do what the people want. And I don't think she's really going to do that in the end. She's going to upset people.
You may be right. I mean, look, you're quite right. Her record as Home Secretary, frankly, is abysmal. She gave one speech at a Tory party conference about getting tough on immigration, and she was hailed as being this wonderful political leader. But, yeah, the track record, John, I agree, has not been brilliant in terms of what she was tasked to do, namely bringing net migration down to the tens of thousands, which simply did not happen. As far as her appointments are concerned, I disagree with you a little bit. I don't think David Davis is soft. And I think, as I said, if you look at this photograph of him in the Mail on Sunday, he's not looking soft. And he has had his nose broken 5 times, and he does see himself as a street fighter and a puncher. We will see. But basically what John is saying to us is, whoever she appoints, she's the Prime Minister. She has got to lead. And I think that's a point, John, thank you, that's extremely well made. Moving on to Patrick in Battersea. Good morning.
Good morning.
Patrick, hi, what have you got?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This democracy that you wanted so much of, we've now got a Prime Minister we didn't vote for, with a Cabinet we didn't vote for, reporting to a Queen we didn't vote for, and any law she makes has to go through a House of Lords that we didn't vote for. So how's that working out for you?
Well, I wasn't recommending a referendum on the monarchy, Patrick, but I mean, we could have a referendum on that.
But you are always talking about how we want a democracy and we want to be able to vote for everything we have. You're cursing the EU for not being democratic when, the people we vote for to go there vote for the people who run it. Do they not?
Well, no. I mean, the European commissioners aren't voted for by anybody. They're appointed by their own prime ministers or presidents.
They're appointed by the prime ministers and presidents of Europe, right?
Yep.
Who we vote for, right?
Yeah, but we don't vote for their mates, do we?
Do we vote for the prime ministers and presidents of Europe?
No. Well, in our nation states we do. In our nation states we do. But we can't. I mean, look, Mr. Juncker, all right, he is the president of the European Commission. You can't vote for him, Patrick, and more importantly, you can't vote to get rid of him, can you?
Who can? The people that we send there to do the voting for us. That's what democracy does. We don't vote for the cabinet either.
Well, of course we don't.
I didn't vote for Boris to be the foreign minister, did I? And I clearly didn't vote for who is now my prime minister, did I?
The big point, Patrick, about this referendum is number one, it was the greatest exercise.
Even in this country, much less the EU. And now we've jumped off a cliff and we're flying in the wind with our butts out. And nobody knows how that's going to end. And the leaders who led us to the edge of the cliff and told us all, let's hold hands and jump, of every single one of you backed out. Every single one of you. Starting with Boris, starting with Gove, and starting with you and Andrea.
Unless I've missed something, Patrick, Boris is now the Foreign Secretary. Did I miss that? Did I get that wrong? And I think you'll find that Andrea Leadsom, is there with food and rural affairs and indeed fisheries under that brief. So I don't really buy that. And look, Patrick, I want to say this to you. Whatever you think the risks of this may be, what we really voted for was for the British Parliament to be the place, ultimately, that makes our laws. And whether they get it right or whether they get it wrong, once every few years, you will get the chance to get rid of them. Thank you. Nikki in Sunderland, what do you think?
Hi, I'm a bit confused about what to say and what not to say. I think I agree with Mr. Farage on most things. I don't take much interest in politics, but he has encouraged me to start voting again. Our laws should be our laws, not EU. I think Theresa May could be good because she's. I read her speeches online about the way she stood up to the police at the Police Federation. She uncovered abuse through people with learning disabilities and all disabilities not getting appropriate adults when being questioned by the police, which is a good thing. At least Mr. Farage now has put Sunderland on the map. Well done, because everyone said Newcastle knew about Newcastle, but now they know about Sunderland.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're right. In fact, I now, Nikki, I mean, first things first, the fact you're back voting again, and if I've had anything to do with that, I'm very proud of that, because that's good, getting people interested in politics, talking about, politics and their futures and engaging. But you're quite right about Sunderland being on the map, because the night of the referendum results, Sunderland, who always pride themselves on getting very early election results through, and I was standing in a room with, 150 people or whatever it was, and when the Sunderland result went up, it's what I now refer to as the Sunderland roar, because we all sort of screamed and began to think, crikey, maybe we're actually going to do this. So it's not me that put Sunderland on the map, Nikki, it's you that put Sunderland on the map, because they've been given all the threats about Nissan and investment and everything else, and the people said, no, we're not going to be threatened. We are going to stand up for what we believe in. Nikki, thank you very much indeed for your call. And next we go to Deborah in Hornchurch. Good morning, Deborah.
Good morning, Nigel, and congratulations on what you've done for this country. I really appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you.
I've been uninterested in politics for many years, and I was a little bit worried when Theresa May was put as Prime Minister. My first vote would have gone to Angela Leadham. But in these first week, if you like, I do feel that she's made some steps to moving forward with the Leave campaign by putting the three Brexiteers in, as you call them. And I just hope and pray that she will find her inner strength and move it forward and not take any notice of people say in Scotland. But I think her choices have been quite good, and I don't think there's any hidden agenda behind them. Davis, excellent reputation. Boris Johnson, well, I love a Boris Johnson, and certainly Liam Fox as well. But from my personal point of view, I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 36 years. I've always abided by laws and regulations. And for the first time in my life, I'm speaking out and saying, actually, this is not what I want. This is not what I want my country to be. Yeah. And I'm with you 100%.
No, thank you. No, well, Deborah, I agree with a lot of what you've just said. Absolutely. With just one slight clarification. It's not the people in Scotland. It's the SNP leadership. And as John from Glasgow earlier said, a lot of those that voted to remain in Scotland did so as Conservative voters because they were told by the Tory leadership to do that. Did it as Labour voters. It's not just the SNP in Scotland. And I think actually, they're singing this tune. They're sounding very sour, very much like bad losers. And the reality is, if the Scots were to have a second referendum on whether to separate from the rest of the United Kingdom, they would lose, and they lose by a bigger margin than last time. And one of the reasons for that is all their economic modelling, when it was Salmond as leader, was based on oil at $113 a barrel. It is now below $50 a barrel. So in terms of economics, separating from the rest of the United Kingdom, frankly, would ruin them. OK, 0345 60 60 973 is the number to ring up and to get engaged with this conversation. Tell me that I'm right. Tell me that I'm really very, very stupid. Either way, do get in touch. You're listening to Nigel Farage on LBC. The time is 11:45. A week into the May Premiership. Is she getting it right? Is she getting it wrong? And we've talked a bit about who's been appointed, the three Brexiteers. And I said I was cheering when I heard the news. But what about those that are out? We haven't considered that. And George Osborne has been sacked. Do we feel any sympathy for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who used the referendum as a means to try and frighten the life out of us and to try and guarantee that he would in turn succeed from David Cameron as Prime Minister? Do you feel sorry for George Osborne? Or like me, do you think he got his just desserts? Arjun in Oxford, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. How are you?
Very well, thank you. What have you got for me?
So I just wanted to say first that it's actually also you who got me inspired to vote. When my friends from France sent me a clip of you speaking in the European Parliament, and I thought, this man's got to be stopped.
Right. No, fair. No, well, actually, that's interesting because politics does have that reaction both ways. Absolutely.
I think it's good you inspired me anyway.
Yeah. But look, I mean, it's better, surely, Arjun, for you to disagree strongly with what I stand for and what I think, than to us to sort of turn the clock back a few years when, frankly, there was almost no choice between the Labour and Conservative parties.
I suppose you're right. But one point I would like to make to you, which is a point that you made repeatedly over the referendum, and you mentioned it this morning on sovereignty, is that I still don't think it's true that the British Parliament has all the power. I mean, there is still an organisation in Europe which has 28 members, which has control over our parliament, and it's called NATO. If Russia were to invade a Baltic state today, our parliament would have no say on whether we have to retaliate. We would do it straight away. The WTO still rules over our trade deals. The UN has a say over our actions, both domestically and internationally. Because at the end of the day, the point is there is no control to be had. No one has control. And in fact, because we live in a world now, a globalized world, where China, an interest rate change in China, or a change in oil production in Saudi Arabia, will have as much of an effect on Britain as the Chancellor and his budget statement.
Well,
do you think I'm right or wrong?
To some extent, Arjun, that's always been the case. I mean, the Wall Street crash of 1929 didn't just affect America and New York and Wall Street. You know, it affected the whole world, including us. Point is this, you know, you're right. We're living in a very interdependent world. That's quite right. And you can view the world, if you like, as being a stormy ocean. The question is, you know, are we in charge of the tiller, charting our course across that ocean, or have we given that responsibility to someone else? You mentioned the World Trade Organization as being a body setting some basic rules for trade, but the point is the United Kingdom has not been a voting member of the World Trade Organization because we've had the European Union doing it on our behalf. And I don't want to go back, Arjun, and fight the referendum battles again, but in essence, my argument was we were giving away the power to make those decisions to another organisation rather than keeping that power in this country for ourselves. And you know, that's what I will stand by. And I do think that when it comes to, you know, health and safety at work rules, or whether we should have, you know, what the quota for cod catches in the North Sea are next year, then that is going to be responsive to people that we send to Westminster and we can fire once every 4 or 5 years. I would agree, Arjun. I'd agree with previous callers. What we've got isn't perfect, but I still believe it's a damn sight better than being run by European commissioners. Thank you, and I'm pleased I inspired you to vote, even if it was for the other side. We go to Sheila in Brentwood. Sheila, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel, and I'd just like to say thank you so much for what you've done for us. I watched you in Thurrock at Circus Tavern last year, and Well, you've inspired us as a former Labour voter who'll never vote Labour again. You're the only politician that actually speaks the language of the working people. And getting back to what we said about Theresa May, I'd like to say, I thought she'd done very well this week until yesterday, and I could not believe what was said. I'm really, really worried now because Nicola Sturgeon is a very, very dangerous, very aggressive politician who will force her views. And if she forces England to remain in this, I think there's going to be a huge backlash.
Well, there will be, Sheila, but not only a backlash in one sense, but also there'll be a split. Because it's pretty... I mean, I shared, during that referendum campaign, I shared platforms with David Davis and with Liam Fox several times, all over the country. And I spent time with them away from the platform, in green rooms, out having a bite to eat. And I am convinced that both of those men absolutely want us to get back control of this country. So if Theresa May listens too much to Nicola Sturgeon, not only will, as you say, people like you in the country who voted for Brexit be pretty upset and pretty worried, but also you'll start to see splits emerge within that cabinet in terms of, when do we trigger Article 50, when do we trigger 50, etc. So Sheila, you're right. I'm with you. I really thought I was going to come on this show today and have to eat humble pie. Admit that I got it hopelessly wrong last week, but I think what happened in Edinburgh yesterday makes me think differently about it. Sheila, thank you very much indeed for your call and for your support. Glenn in Thurrock, good morning. What have you got for me?
Morning, Nigel.
Hi.
I think the appointment of Theresa May is a good thing so far. I mean, I think before the vote to exit, she was kind of hedging her bets. She kind of followed David Cameron and what his decision was. I think David Cameron should have remained sort of impartial to the vote, to be honest, and it would have saved his political career. And he should have made plans for the vote to go either way, which is a mistake that he made.
Yeah. But the only thing is, Glenn, that if Cameron had stayed above the fray, as Wilson did 40 years ago, then Cameron would still be Prime Minister, but we'd still have George Osborne as Chancellor, and I'm really pleased that Osborne's gone. I mean, what do you think?
Well, it's worked out better for us, but it's not worked out so well for Cameron and Osborne.
No.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm glad Osborne's gone because his behaviour during the run-up to the election was terrible, really. I mean, he's caused all this uncertainty with the economics and I don't think he handled it well.
No,
I think he's right. He's gone. I think the appointment of Boris and the other Brexiteers is a good thing because it shows willing from Theresa May for her to get us the ball rolling in terms of us exiting the EU.
No, absolutely.
And I think so far it's a positive thing. I think Nicola Sturgeon, deep down, I think she knows she can't survive without us, unless she's completely delusional.
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. She certainly does her best to upset the English at every given opportunity. Glenn, thank you very much. And lastly, we're going to go to Jenny in Milton Keynes. Jenny, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel, and thanks for getting us where we are.
Well, we're there.
What I'd like to say about Theresa May is, yes, it does look like a good start with Brexiteers and Remainders in the cabinet. As for going off to Scotland to, as somebody said, lick the toes, was it? Or
yes,
the feet of,
yes.
Nicola
Sturgeon, yeah.
There could be another reason for that, and that's just to keep her sweet until we can trigger Article 50 of Lisbon, and then we can just go off to a new future once the other MPs, the Remainders, who would have to vote this through Parliament, once they've been convinced that leaving is a good thing. And we've seen the first thing, which is hopeful today, and that is the offer from Australia of a free trade deal.
Jenny, all of that is great news. Australia, Canada, they're queuing up from all over the world. They want to get involved with this country, do trade deals directly with us. It's what we fought the referendum for, and maybe you're right. Maybe you're absolutely right. Maybe Theresa May is playing a canny game with Nicola Sturgeon and is not selling out. Well, that's all from me. I've enjoyed the last couple of hours, and I hope you have. And if you've missed any of it, you can catch up. You've got the LBC podcast app available on iPhones and on Android phones too. Coming up at 3, it's Stig Abel. But next up, it's Tom Swarbrick.